Hi, my name is Dr. Nathan Groot. I am a music instructor at the Arkansas School for Mathematics, Sciences, and the Arts. Today we're going to be looking at the viola excerpt from the Overture to the Magic Flute by Mozart. This is part of set 3 for the Arkansas All-State audition. This is an overture, or instrumental introduction to Mozart's 1791 opera, The Magic Flute. As with all orchestral excerpts, it's really important to learn a little bit about the piece that you're playing, listen to the piece, and do some score study. I recommend using ASMSLP.org to find a copy of the score and a full copy of the viola part, and also to use YouTube to watch a video of the scrolling score alongside an audio recording. This can be really helpful when you are studying a piece to know how your part fits in with the rest of the orchestra. Mozart is part of the classical era of music. This is the era that comes after the Baroque period and before the Romantic period. One important thing to know about the classical period, and also specifically the music of Mozart, is that everything needs to be very ordered, balanced, controlled, and clean. So that's going to affect how we play this music and the level of clarity we're really going to be after when we are performing this music. The first thing I want to address in this excerpt is the bowing. There is a bowing that you will need to do that is not written in the part. It's a double up. Every time you have this group of 16th notes that are under a slur, the next 8th notes should have a double up bow. So I'll show you from the beginning what that looks like. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, up. So every time you have that pattern, you're going to want to have a double up bow. That's going to get you back on track so that your bow isn't backwards. This happens a lot in this excerpt. It might be helpful for you to mark all of those double up bows just to make sure that you are keeping things on track. This excerpt is in cut time, so when you look at that tempo marking of 84, that's going to be the half note equals 84. Make sure that you're really clear on that so that you don't end up accidentally performing this at half tempo. You might also notice that there's a sort of shorthand being used for 8th notes. You'll notice this first in measure 28, or the second measure that you play in the excerpt. It looks like a half note with a line through it. Don't get too confused by this. These are really just 8th notes. So for each of these sort of shorthand things that look like half notes, you're going to play 4 8th notes. Let's also talk just a little bit about syncopations. The most obvious example of this is in measure 54 and 56, right before letter B. If you are subdividing and counting in 4/4 instead of 2/2 half time, this syncopation will sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, 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 ta. If you're counting it in cut time, which you inevitably will be doing once you're at full tempo, it'll sound like this. Da, 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 da. Ta, 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 da, da. I would recommend practicing this subdividing first and then try making the transition from counting in 4 to then counting in 2. Now, there are other spots where it's not syncopated when you're counting in 4, but it does feel syncopated when you move into cut time. One example of this is where you have in measure 43 and 44 a sforzando between big beats 1 and 2. So, bottom, bottom. So you're going to want to make sure that you are counting this correctly. If needed, start by practicing with all 4 of those subdivisions within the measure, sort of counting the quarter note, and then, as before, transition into that cut time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the articulations and dynamics. First, you'll notice that there is an articulation that's on most of these eighth notes that sort of looks like a little triangle. This is what's called a staccatissimo. So we're maybe used to staccatos. This is going to be even more so. So even shorter, even more space between these. And this is going to inform the way that we use our bow. So the type of bow stroke we want to use for this needs to show that separation in the staccatissimo and also work at a fast tempo. If we're too off, that's just not going to work at a fast tempo. We're going to be all over the place and it's going to be messy. If we're too on, then we won't be playing the correct articulation. I like to use a bow stroke that is sort of a mix between on and off. I've heard this bow stroke referred to as onf in orchestras before, and I just really like that description of it. Basically, you start from the string, and you have a slight release at the end of each of those. When you speed it up, it sounds like this. This is a really common bow stroke in Mozart and a lot of classical symphonies, so it's good to go ahead and work on mastering this now. Another aspect that's important in getting this bow stroke clean is thinking about which side of the string you are playing on. This can be a little bit of a confusing topic at first, but hear me out. Down bows and up bows are actually pulling and pushing the string. In fact, in French, they even use the words for pull and push instead of down and up. Down bows pull the string. Up bows push the string. You pull from a different side than you push from. Imagine if you were using your finger, pulling from this side and then pushing from this side. So, when I'm doing the stroke, rather than thinking of just going like this, I'm thinking of pulling from the down bow side and then pushing from the up bow side. And then when you have that slight release that allows for the staccatissimo articulation, then you really get a resonant sound and more control over that bow stroke. It's something to practice, and it's also something that will really help with the articulations in this excerpt. One of the most important parts of this excerpt to get right are the dynamics. You'll notice that there are a lot of changes between piano and forte. You want to make this really, really clear. This is kind of difficult to do, especially at a fast tempo. So practice it with really clear dynamics when you're playing at a slow tempo, and then try to transfer that to your fast tempo. One of the ways to do that is to really plan exactly what you're going to do with the bow. In terms of bow usage, I like to think about 3 bow variables that we can use when we are making plans on how to use our bow. Weight, speed, contact point. So when you are playing at a piano dynamic, you will have a different weight, a different speed, and a different contact point than when you are playing at a louder dynamic. So practically, when you're playing this, that might mean that in the piano section, your contact point is going to be further away from the bridge. Your weight is going to be less, and maybe a little less speed, although with this bow stroke, speed is going to be a less important variable than weight and contact point. So you'll see here, I start out further down with less weight. Closer to the bridge, more weight. Drift out. The up bow helps me get back to the place in the bow I want to be, close to the frog. So this can be a little bit subtle in terms of that change. It doesn't have to be that extreme in terms of the change in the contact point, but that little difference will help you achieve that dynamic. Weight is probably going to be your best friend in really achieving that. So thinking about being lighter on the piano, heavier on the forte. If you really pull off that dynamic, it'll be really special in your audition. You're also going to want to pay attention to where things are not piano. So for example, at letter A, it's forte and it stays forte. So don't get soft when it's still forte. You want to create a sort of explosive effect with these sforzandos, but you don't want to go beyond good taste. Whereas maybe in late romantic 20th century music, you might want a little bit of a grittier sound. You want to try to make these sforzandos really appear and explode, but you want to still maintain a good tone. One of the ways to do this is through the contrast of the sforzando note and the note that comes after. A lot of these sforzandos have a slur into another note. So for example, the sort of syncopated sforzandos in measure 42, you might have where you start out stronger and then let off. That way you are showing emphasis on this note. Another place you can look is measure 50, where you have 2 sforzandos right next to each other. How do you show emphasis when there are 2 right next to each other? A little bit of decay can help in that. And a little bit of a space. So the beginning of those notes really pop. All right, finally, there's one spot I really want to draw your attention to, and that is measure 149 through 152. It's, in my opinion, the most difficult part of the excerpt. So I'm going to start out by giving you a fingering. It involves shifting up each measure. I'll go slowly so that you can see what the fingering is. So I'm going to start the measure before that at measure 148. So we have B flat, 2, first position. Still first position, but we want our B flat to now be a B natural behind the C. So now we're in measure 150. When that, after the 2 C's at the beginning of 150, we're going to go up to a 3 on the D natural. Same thing, E flat. Here, before the F, we could just keep going up the G string, but it's, I think, maybe a little safer just to go ahead and shift down to the D string, to a 2 in first position. So this is the finger pattern we're looking at. We have a half step between 2 and 3 and a whole step between 1 and 2. C, B natural, A natural, B natural, and then we have D, C sharp, B natural, C sharp. After that we have E flat, D, C, D. Here, if we shift it up, it would be the same, but since I'm shifting down, it's going to be just this. So the pattern continues in terms of half steps and whole steps, but in the way that I do the fingering, technically the very last one with the F natural has the 1 and 2 together. Practice this section slowly. Make sure you're getting all of the correct half steps and whole steps in there. Make sure that your shifts are accurate, and also make sure you're putting the correct number of eighth notes in before each group of 16th notes. I found in my own practice, I had a little bit of a tendency to either put too many or too few in there, and that kind of messes up what's going on metrically in that section. Once you finish up there, everything that comes after in the second part of this excerpt is more or less the same as what happened in the first part. So having practiced the first part, you're probably going to be okay here. In closing, practice it slowly. Make sure that you are practicing with the correct bow stroke from the very beginning. Pay attention to the rhythm and articulations and dynamics. Make sure that all of those are spot on and you will be good to go. As always, if I missed anything in this video or there's anything in particular that you would like to know about, you can feel free to leave that in the comments or reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to talk more about it. Best of luck at the audition and happy practicing.